Alright, welcome back to the Real Guy Garage. Today's victim is a 2003 Ford F150 Super Crew King Ranch with a 5.4 liter 2-valve motor and a 4R1000 4-speed automatic transmission, 9 3/4 Ford corporate rear differential with 373 gear ratio front and rear. What we're going to be doing with this one is changing the four-wheel drive actuator fork. Similar to the Dodges of this era, these Fords use a vacuum actuated front differential vacuum actuator. Essentially, when you put the truck in four-wheel drive, the actuator is a little vacuum diaphragm that slides an arm out that pushes the fork in, and there's a small coupler within the front differential that slides over the two axle tubes and locks them together so that your front drive shaft is driving both front axle shafts. What's pretty common to fail on these trucks, in addition to the vacuum actuator itself, which, as I mentioned, has a little diaphragm in it and is plastic and uses a little aluminum arm being under the front of the truck, especially here where we use salt on the roads, they tend to corrode. The little aluminum arms break off and all kinds of fun stuff. But the other big problem is the fork itself uses plastic fingers where it slides out over top of the coupler. Up until a few years ago, you could only buy the fork kit from Ford Motor Company, but Dorman has since brought out an OE Solutions product to fix that. And it essentially gives you exactly what the Ford kit did, which was the roll pin, the O-ring, and the snap ring, in addition to the actual little fork itself. This is a direct replacement as I drop it on the floor. And you can see where the little plastic feet are here. That's what tends to break. When that breaks, what happens is it's only the little tangs in here that are trying to push that coupler down over top of those two axles. So first thing we're going to do is get it up on a set of stands so we're safe to work under it. And then we're going to get that right side tire off, and we're going to go ahead and pull the stabilizer link so we have a little bit more room to work on that side. And then we'll pull the CV shaft out. Okay, tires off, links off, we're on stands. So your 21 mil on this truck to remove the lugs. You need a 36 millimeter to remove the CV shaft axle nut, and a cotter pin, which we're going to replace that cotter pin. Swaybar link, you need 9/16 or 14 millimeter to remove. And we come around here where I have my creeper. So as I said, axle nut, swaybar link. Next thing we're going to do is take off the 6 12-point 12 millimeter bolts that retain the inside of the CV shaft to the axle end here. So we'll get those off there. Okay, so with your CV axle removed here, which, as I mentioned, they're a 12-point 12 millimeter bolt, which we have here. Our next step is to get down here, slide under the truck here, which you may have to remove a cover. This one here, I think we took the cover off at one point. So you can see the actuator I've previously replaced on this truck. So, see there's a bolt that goes through with a nut on the back side here. And its job is to hang this side of the axle. So, that's going to have to come out of there. Our actuator is going to have to come off. So these two vacuum lines up here have to come off. Then we have to remove the little cert clip that's here and take the arm off there and pop that through. And then we can remove these bolts here. Because our little arm here, you'll see, hopefully I can get that up into there a little better. Okay, see where this arm comes up in here? And it goes into the differential housing. Well, that little arm is for that fork. Okay, so here's our one axle end removed. And the first thing I saw, there's our little plastic feet. Which confirms our diagnosis. As I mentioned, we've got the vacuum diaphragm off. That's the one bolt you have to remove that goes through the axle hanger here. So it's an 18mm nut with a 15mm bolt. So now with that off, you can actually see our fork. And if you're like me, you got to make sure that you dump all the diff fluid on the floor, despite the fact that you put a drain pan under here. So there's the other half of our little fork. It's currently laying under there. So the only thing actuating our four-wheel drive right now, like I said, is those little feet. So instead of it locking into four-wheel right away, you can see how much play there is. Which means our little vacuum diaphragm that's trying to pull this arm back to slide this over top, right? Because this goes like this and it locks in the right side axle. Well, it means that that arm is having to pulling its usual distance, but the collar isn't sliding all the way. Because with it pulled all the way here, we have that much before it actually grabs it. Because this is all the way out, and it should be out to here. It should be out there to grab the axle, and if you see, this is as far as the arm goes, because that little plastic spacer is supposed to push it the rest of the way. So that roll pin up top's got to come out, and then that sleeve will slide out while this little arm here. And we'll be able to get take the fork and that coupler out. See, this is just a spacer here, so you gotta watch for that. We'll put a dab of transmission assembly lube on that before we put that back in. So as I said, well, first thing I noticed was there's the rest of our little fingers. And now is a good time to show. Okay. So like I said, it includes an O-ring. And that's where the O-ring goes. That keeps differential fluid from leaking past on the shaft here. So we go through and we knock our roll pin in. And the good part is you can punch it straight in because you're not actually going to let it drop through because there's a little housing there. But as you can see, there's our little feet. Judging by the wear, this has been an ongoing problem for a while. Which this is the original fork, and the truck has 300,000 kilometers on it. So, and it was used for a snowplow at one point in time. So here's our little coupler, and here's our fork. So as I said, this is what it's been doing for quite a while. Rather than properly actuating it, pushing this collar all the way out, it hasn't been. Because how this works is, this coupler, when you want four-wheel drive, it's supposed to push because this little arm here is going to pull towards this right end of the axle. And when it does, it's going to slide this fork and pull it so that the coupler couples onto the axle end, and now both front axles are locked together. When I mentioned before that the four-wheel drive system on my Dodge Ram is very similar, it essentially uses the same style, except with, of course, I have a solid front axle rather than a center differential carrier and then axle stubs. But it uses a collar like this with a fork that's vacuum actuated, so that when you put your truck into four-wheel drive, the vacuum switch pulls the coupler and locks your two axles together so that you now have four-wheel drive. Here's our new fork, and you can see how much tighter the fit is here, so that when this slides, it's going to move it right away. There's not going to be that. And I will say that the Dorman part versus the original, the arms are a hell of a lot thicker, so I'm pretty impressed by that anyway. So I didn't mention these. These are the 4 bolts that retain this housing onto the center differential. They're just 15mm bolts. So, slide back under the truck, and I'm going to pop the new roll pin in here. I'm going to put the coupler back in, and then we can clean out this axle and get all those little chunks of plastic out of there. And we'll go ahead and clean both surfaces up good, and we can put a bit of silicone on there. Okay, so I got a thin film of just RTV on there. While it sets up, I just wanted to show the difference here. So now, the minute you actuate the shaft, right away, it moves into place. So now, I'll wipe that little bit of fluid off, and just make sure it's good and clean, and I'll put this axle stub back up in there. Okay, so our axle's back in, everything's torqued, swaybar link's back on, differential, axle stubs back in, the whole works. So overall, this is not too bad of a job. The only thing we have left to do on this is we're going to go ahead and check the differential fluid in the truck, just to make sure, because we know for a fact we did lose a bit of fluid. So you want to make sure that the level's full.